Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Collins, and I'm 36 years old. I used to work as a specialist in computer security, but these days, I'm proud to say I've made a successful career as a published author of young adult and romance novels. Life took a major turn when I was 34. While driving to my mom's house one winter day, I hit a patch of black ice and skidded out of control. At that time, I'd been married to my wife, Sharon Collins, for 6 years. She was 32 back then and remains as stunning as ever, with her strikingly exotic features, long, straight brown hair cascading down to her shoulders, bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle, and a smile capable of brightening any room. I first met Sharon when I was 24. After wrapping up a client meeting at a restaurant, I was heading to my car when I heard a commotion nearby. The sound caught my attention. It was like someone was in pain, curious and concerned. I walked over and found a young woman sitting on the ground, clutching her ankle, which was visibly swollen. I approached her calmly and suggested she take a few deep breaths to steady herself. Once she started to relax, I gently picked her up and moved her to a safer spot on the grass, away from any cars in the busy parking lot. After calling 911, I reassured her that I'd be back in no time. I went back into the restaurant, grabbed a towel filled with ice, and rushed back outside. By the time I returned, I could hear distant sirens, hoping they were on their way to help her. She was shivering, so I wrapped the ice around her injured ankle and ran to my truck to grab a moving blanket I kept for emergencies. I covered her with it, speaking softly to keep her calm until the EMTs arrived. Once they were there, I stepped aside, knowing she was in good hands. Before I left, I provided my contact information to the first responders and wished her well. The following Monday, I was preparing for a client meeting at work when my boss, Adam Walker, called me to his office. To my surprise, the woman I'd helped was standing there on crutches, wearing a walking boot. Adam introduced her as his niece, Sharon, and turned to her with a smile, saying, "Here he is, the man you've been looking for." Then he gestured to me, saying, "Andrew, this is my niece Sharon. She wanted to return something to you." Sharon handed me the same moving blanket I'd used to keep her warm. I chuckled, noticing she'd even washed it. "You didn't have to go through the trouble of returning this," I said with a grin. "I'm just glad I had it on hand. It seemed like you were starting to go into shock, and keeping you warm was the least I could do. How's your ankle? I hope it's nothing too serious." She smiled and said, "It's just a bad sprain. Thankfully, not broken. I'll be in this boot and on crutches for a couple of weeks, and then just the boot for a bit longer. But I wanted to thank you for what you did." The EMTs gave me your contact information, and when I told Uncle Adam about how I fell off a curb and mentioned your name, he couldn't stop laughing. Although I had a busy schedule, Sharon and I exchanged phone numbers, and I promised to call her soon. That call turned into a casual chat, and not long after, I asked her out on a date. We went to a nice restaurant, where we got to know each other better. Sharon told me she was 23, had recently earned her bachelor's degree in business management, and was working as an administrative assistant for an executive at a local manufacturing company. She also shared her love for live music and theater. As the evening ended, she asked if I wanted to see her again, and I didn't hesitate to say yes. I explained that my job as a computer security specialist often required me to be on call, but I promised to reach out as soon as my schedule allowed. The following week turned out to be a chaotic one at work, filled with non-stop client emergencies that left me completely drained. By Saturday, the rotation shifted, and I was finally free to relax. I called Sharon and explained how hectic my week had been. I asked if she'd mind a simple evening at my place, where I could cook for her and we could watch a movie. She loved the idea. We spent the evening enjoying dinner and watching a few episodes of Game of Thrones, which turned out to be a perfect low-key date. Over the next few weeks, our relationship blossomed. After about 6 weeks of dating, I took Sharon back to the same restaurant where we'd had our first date. That night, she told me she loved me and wanted us to be exclusive. She looked a little annoyed when I laughed, but I quickly reassured her. "Sharon, I'm sorry for laughing, but I've already been exclusive with you since the day I met you. You're the only woman I've been interested in for a long time. I love you so much that I wouldn't even notice a parade of Playboy bunnies if I was with you." Her face softened, and she smiled, kissed me goodnight, and headed inside. A few months later, on her birthday, I asked her to marry me. and she said yes. It felt like the perfect time to meet each other's families. My parents and younger sister adored Sharon. They thought she was wonderful and believed I was lucky to have found her. However, meeting her family didn't go as smoothly. Her father wasn't happy that we'd gotten engaged before he'd met me. He began grilling me with questions, and Sharon started to speak up in my defense. But her mother interjected firmly. "You know what, Harold? That kind of attitude is exactly why Sharon stayed away in the first place. She came back to introduce us to the man she loves. If you can't be polite, you're welcome to leave until they're gone." Her father gave me a look of pure disdain, but I didn't respond. Instead, I took Sharon's hand and gently led her out of the room. Once we were alone, I said to her, "Sharon, I love you with all my heart. You make life sweeter just by being in it. But I have to be honest, I won't go back in there if your father stays in the room. I understand they're your family," I told Sharon as we stood outside. "But if your father is so against me, it's going to create a serious problem for our marriage right from the start. Please, don't leave without me. I'll wait here while you let your mom know we're leaving." Sharon gave me a determined look and headed back to the living room. A few moments later, I could hear her voice rising in anger. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" she shouted. "You have to ruin everything. That man, the one I love, is ready to leave without me because of you. If you don't leave, I won't force you out of your own house, but I promise you this. I'll never step foot in here again as long as you're around. You won't be invited to the wedding, you won't walk me down the aisle, and you won't give me away. I won't miss you, not even a little. But trust me, others will notice you're not there. Mom, you're welcome. Dad, you're not." Moments later, Sharon came back to where I was waiting, grabbed my arm, and said, "Let's go." As we left, Sharon admitted that the only reason she'd wanted me to meet her parents was out of a sense of tradition. When it came to who would walk her down the aisle, she had already decided her Aunt Sharon's husband, Fred, would take on the role. Aunt Sharon and Uncle Jeff, thankfully, were incredibly supportive. They welcomed me warmly, treated me like family, and didn't seem the least bit surprised when they heard about the confrontation with her dad. The wedding plans were coming together beautifully when disaster struck. I was involved in a horrific car accident while driving a company vehicle to meet a client. A truck with faulty brakes ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. I ended up with a broken back, hip, one arm, and both legs. On top of that, I sustained an injury to my groin that left me sterile. I spent nearly a year in and out of the hospital and rehabilitation. The trucking company responsible for the accident went bankrupt because of the settlement they had to pay me and my company. It turned out they'd been cutting corners on maintenance despite knowing the truck's brakes were faulty. During my recovery, I started writing to pass the time. My boss, after reading some of the drafts, secretly sent a few of my romance novels to a publisher. To my astonishment, I received a generous advance and a contract for 5 more books. Then, to my further surprise, he submitted my young adult novels to the same publisher, which led to another smaller advance and a contract for 2 additional books. Although I would always need a back brace and would walk with a limp, Sharon stood by me through everything. She was my rock, even when I urged her to find someone who could give her the life she deserved without all the pain and challenges my injuries brought. Despite my insistence, she stayed. With the settlement money and my book royalties, I sought advice to protect our finances. I set up a trust fund and placed all the proceeds from the accident and the book royalties into it. To be extra cautious, I had my lawyer draft a prenuptial agreement. Sharon signed it without hesitation or complaint. It took us 30 months from the time we got engaged to finally tie the knot, but the wait was worth it. Our wedding was perfect, and the honeymoon was everything we'd hoped for. Other than some back pain from the long drive, I felt great, and, more importantly, deeply in love. After a year of marriage, we bought a house and some land just outside the city, thanks to the trust fund. Life felt stable and happy, but things changed 5 years into our marriage. That October, Sharon's boss retired, and the company replaced him with a much younger man in November. It was like a switch had been flipped in our relationship. Sharon became distant. No hugs, no kisses, and no intimacy. For 6 weeks, it felt like I'd become invisible. Then, one evening, I brought her roses and a box of her favorite chocolates, hoping to rekindle some of the warmth. But instead of appreciating the gesture, she seemed more excited to talk about her new boss. She gushed about how young, handsome, and wonderful he was. Her enthusiasm hit a nerve. I was jealous, probably without reason, but her complete disregard for my gesture stung. That night, when she asked me if something was wrong, I clammed up and muttered, "No," before heading to the couch to sleep. The next day, my car wouldn't start, and our company car was in the shop. I left a note on the chocolates, telling Sharon to rent a car until I could get mine fixed. Then I took her car to work. My coworkers clearly noticed something was off. They tiptoed around me like they were walking on thin ice. Around 2 p.m., I got a call from Sharon. She was crying. "Andrew, what did I do? Why are you mad at me?" Still feeling hurt and defensive, I snapped, "Well, I guess your wonderful new boss couldn't cheer you up today. Looks like his shit stinks just as bad as mine." Then I added, "I'll be at a hotel tonight. You can let your amazing boss know you're all alone," and hung up. I informed the office switchboard not to forward me any personal calls for the rest of the week. When I stopped by the house that evening to grab a few things, Sharon was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly. I walked past her without saying a word, grabbed a clean uniform and some essentials, and left. The following morning, my boss called me into his office. He started lecturing me about Sharon calling his house the night before, asking what I'd said to upset her. That was the final straw. "I've worked here for over 6 years without ever prying into your personal life. Stay out of mine," I said sharply. "And just so we're clear, if you ever try this again, I'll quit." Fuming, I stormed out, punched my time card, and went for a drive to cool down. About an hour outside the city, my company cell phone rang. It was my boss. "Andrew, I'm sorry for overstepping," he said, "but your wife and mine have become close friends." My wife was upset and insisted I try to help. I was still furious when my boss called. "My resignation will be on your desk before the end of the day," I snapped. "I told you to stay out of my personal life." Without waiting for a response, I hung up, turned off my phone, and drove straight back to the office. Once there, I typed up my resignation letter, handed it to him along with my office keys, company car keys, and phone, and walked out without another word. I stopped at Walmart on the way home and picked up a cheap TracFone flip phone and a prepaid card for 300 minutes. Once I got it activated, I called Sharon. When she answered, her tone was hesitant. "Hello. May I ask who's calling?" "It's Andrew," I said coldly, "your current husband. I'm calling to give you my new number and let you know where I stand. I'm staying away until you decide what's more important, your new boss or the husband you've ignored for over a month. I'll keep paying the bills, but when I come back, I expect to find the woman I married, or I expect you to be gone." Her voice quivered. "Andrew, what are you talking about? What did I do? What do you mean by current husband?" Feigning indifference, I replied, "Well, to quote a certain wife I used to know when she was mad, you know what you did. Figure it out. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon to pick up my computer and backup drives. Please make yourself scarce while I do. Don't bother trying to reach me at work either. I quit today because you dragged my boss into this mess. For now, I'll be staying in the apartment above my parents' garage. Take some time to think about the past month and how you've treated me since your wonderful, amazing new boss entered your life." After hanging up, I called my mom. "Is the apartment over the garage vacant?" I asked. "If it is, I'd like to stay there for a week or two." She pressed me for details, but I avoided answering and repeated my question. Finally, she admitted the apartment was empty and said I was welcome to use it. I assured her I'd be there before the weekend. The next afternoon, I returned home to gather my writing equipment and about a week's worth of clothes. Sharon was out, as requested, and I made a quick exit back to the hotel. That night, I planned my trip to my parents' house for the following day. When I woke up to the sound of rain, I knew the roads would be treacherous. It was late November in the Midwest, after all. I adjusted my travel schedule, anticipating the drive would take twice as long as usual. I was about a mile from my parents' house when I hit a patch of black ice. Despite my best efforts to control the skid, my car slid into a ditch with a heavy thud. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting through my back, leaving me momentarily dazed. Something under the seat seemed tangled around my feet and the pedals. Taking deep breaths to steady myself, I reached down and discovered a Walmart bag. Inside were a partially used tube of KY jelly, an open box of condoms, and a bottle of strawberry-flavored warming gel. My stomach dropped. I shoved the items back into the bag, stuffed it under the seat, and called 911, explaining that while the accident was minor, I'd re-injured my back and didn't feel safe moving. When the ambulance arrived, I directed the tow truck to take my car to my parents' house. At the hospital, they removed my back brace, placed me on a backboard, and transported me to the ER. Although the x-rays showed no new injuries, my back pain persisted, and the hospital decided to keep me overnight. As I lay there, my thoughts raced back to what I'd found in the car. Had Sharon betrayed me? Why hadn't she been honest if she wanted more than I could give her? Why hadn't she asked for a divorce instead of sneaking around? Later that evening, my parents arrived at the hospital. My mom, being herself, oscillated between smothering me with affection and scolding me for being careless. I finally asked her to step out for a bit so I could talk to my dad alone. Reluctantly, she went to get coffee. "Dad, I found something that makes me think Sharon's cheating on me," I confessed. "Things have been bad at home since she got her new boss, and I think he's the one she's involved with. What do you think I should do?" Dad's expression turned somber. He thought for a moment before responding. "If you want to save your marriage, ask her directly if she's cheating. But if you're ready to end it, gather solid evidence first. You've got enough in your trust to hire a private investigator. Whatever you do, don't ignore this. It'll eat away at you." "Thanks, Dad," I said. "I can't live with a cheater, but I don't have concrete proof yet. I've left Sharon at the house for now, but once I'm out of here, I'll go home and move her into the guest room until I figure this out. I won't show her what I found unless I have to." As Dad nodded, my mom returned with coffee, and the nurse came in to announce visiting hours were over. She told me I'd likely be discharged the following morning. Once they left, I retrieved my phone and called my trust lawyer, asking if he could recommend a private investigator. He gave me a name and number, which I noted down before ending the call. I rolled over in bed, every movement revealing new sore spots, but eventually, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, the doctor came in, checked me over, and signed my discharge papers. I waited for my mom or dad to pick me up, and when they both arrived, they took me back to their house. I was stiff, sore, and overwhelmed by a deep sadness. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang. It was Sharon calling my mom. She asked to speak to me, but my mom, clearly upset after what I had shared with her and Dad the night before, glared at the phone. Covering the microphone, she asked, "Do you really want to talk to that wife of yours?" I sighed. I might as well get it over with. "Hand me the phone." When I answered, I didn't hold back. "Hello, Sharon. Written any brooms lately?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end before she responded. "Why are you being such a mean jerk?" "Gee, I don't know," I replied. "Maybe it's because ever since you got your shiny new pretty boy boss, you've stopped being my wife. Think about it. When was the last time we made love? Hell, Sharon, you haven't even given me pity sex in over 6 weeks." I continued, keeping my tone cold. "I'll be home in a day or two, as soon as I can sort out getting your car into a shop. I slid into a ditch last night and spent the night in the hospital. I didn't call you because there wasn't much you could have done from where you are. I'll look into getting you a new car if the damage on this one is too severe. But when I do get home, you're moving into the guest room. You'll stay there until the wife I married decides to come back, or until you decide to leave." There was a gasp on the other end before the line went dead. Afterward, I called the private investigator recommended by my lawyer. I gave him Sharon's workplace address and told him about the Walmart bag I had found. He chuckled and asked sarcastically, "Did you use protection?" "Listen," I snapped. "I've been sterile since a car accident 2 years before we got married. Do you want the job or not? If not, stop wasting my time with jokes. I wouldn't have called if I weren't serious." I also gave him the name of Sharon's boss, Tony, or Gerald Maxwell, and asked for a full background check. I want his address, his wife's name, his kids' names, everything down to how many fleas his dog has. I'm not planning to hurt him, but if he's screwing my wife, there will be consequences. The investigator apologized for the earlier comment, quoted his rates, and we agreed to move forward. Later, I went out to inspect Sharon's car. The damage was extensive. The entire front end was crushed, and the front wheels were pushed back at least 3 inches. While emptying the car, I found the Walmart bag with the incriminating items. I took it back to the garage apartment and hid it in a secret compartment I'd built as a teenager for hiding booze. Afterward, I called my insurance agent and a mechanic I trusted back home. The agent promised to send an adjuster out in the morning, while the mechanic agreed to take care of the car once it was transported. The next day, the adjuster arrived. He totaled the car and asked if I wanted to keep it or let the insurance company scrap it. After hearing how much they would deduct if I kept it, I told him to take it away. I promised to have the car emptied by the afternoon, and he assured me it would be removed by the weekend. As I finished clearing out the trunk, I found another bag in the spare tire well. Inside were a wadded-up bustier and a pair of crotchless panties. The discovery felt like another dagger to the heart. Later that afternoon, Dad drove me to a local Ford dealership where I purchased a brand new F-150 with all the bells and whistles. The insurance check covered part of the cost, but I still had to dip into my trust for the rest. Once the deal was done, I decided it was time to return home and face whatever was waiting for me. I packed up everything from the apartment, including the hidden bag, and hit the road. The drive gave me time to reflect. I questioned what I could have done differently to make Sharon turn away from me. I also imagined what life would be like after the divorce that now felt inevitable. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that my car was still parked where I'd left it, and there were no other vehicles around. It was only 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I assumed Sharon was still at work. Inside, the house was quiet, but the phone's message light was blinking. I pressed play, and Sharon's voice filled the room. "I finally realize why you're so angry," she began. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you, but I got caught up in Jerry's charm, his lies, and the way he carried himself. I've quit my job, and I've told HR exactly why. Tony won't have a job after tomorrow. I'm going to stay with Aunt Sharon and give you space to decide if there's any way we can save our marriage. Please think about it. Let me know what I can do to fix this. I'm so sorry. Goodbye." Hearing her message, I realized the private investigator services were no longer necessary for Sharon, but I decided to redirect his efforts toward digging up dirt on Mr. Maxwell. I called the private investigator to inform him about the recent changes, particularly Sharon moving out. As I walked around the house, I noticed that she hadn't taken most of her belongings. Her clothes, makeup, and grooming supplies were still there. She had taken her jewelry box and some of the cash we kept for household expenses, but it was only a couple of $100s. That didn't bother me much. What stood out was how my usually fashion-conscious wife left all her clothes behind. It made me wonder if she saw this as just a temporary bump in our marriage. Despite my anger, there was no one there to vent it at, so I stewed in silence. A situation that's never suited me well. Frustrated, I called Aunt Sharon. "Would you mind asking Sharon what she wants me to do with her clothes and makeup?" I asked. She left a message asking how she could fix this and earn my forgiveness. "Please let her know that forgiveness isn't needed, because I'll never forget the betrayal." I apologized to Aunt Sharon for unloading on her, then hung up. Afterward, I started packing Sharon's clothes. I carefully bagged up everything that could survive being crammed into garbage bags and hung the rest in the closet of the smallest bedroom, one as far away from the master bedroom as possible. It was a petty, childish gesture, but at the time, it felt satisfying. That evening, Sharon called. "Where are we going with our marriage?" she asked. "We're not going anywhere," I replied coldly. "You destroyed it the moment you dropped your panties for someone who wasn't me, your once loving husband. You've hurt me, and you've hurt us beyond repair. I don't ever want to see you again, but you need to come back and collect your things before I decide to burn them. Does that answer your question?" She sobbed on the other end of the line before hanging up. That was the last I heard from her for over 3 weeks. 2 days after that call, I had divorce papers served to her. The next day, Aunt Sharon came by to collect her clothes and the 2 grocery bags containing the evidence I'd found. Before leaving, she returned Sharon's wedding and engagement rings. It was a quiet, sobering moment. When Sharon finally reached out again, it was through a letter. She sent me the signed divorce papers and a request to meet face-to-face. I agreed, but made it clear we wouldn't be meeting at my house. Instead, I suggested meeting at Jerry's house. There was a sharp gasp on her end before the call abruptly ended. A week later, I received the private investigator's final report. It confirmed what I'd suspected. Sharon had been living with Tony. His wife, meanwhile, was pursuing a brutal divorce, attempting to take him for everything he had. Now I understood Sharon's reaction when I'd mentioned Jerry. It all made sense. With the divorce set to be finalized in about 6 weeks, I threw myself into my work. Writing had become my full-time career, and I'd hired a college student to be my paid proofreader. She lived on campus, so I emailed her my files, and she turned them around quickly, usually within a week. I never received a proper explanation from Sharon about why she strayed. In the end, though, I realized it didn't matter. Tony got what he deserved. He ended up with her, and now he'll spend the rest of their time together looking over his shoulder, wondering when she might betray him, too. Time passes, and life moves forward. While the pain lingered for a while, I eventually found peace in the knowledge that I deserved better, and in the realization that sometimes, moving on is the best thing you can do. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.